So you buy a piece of property, you check all the zoning, you do your homework, and you figure, okay, my rights are solid. But what if they weren't? What if a local government could make your rights just disappear? Not with a bulldozer, but with a red pen, just by changing a definition. Today, we are digging into a fascinating and frankly troubling case out of Forsyth County, Georgia, right on Lake Lanier, that shows just how that can happen.
I mean, really, think about that. How could the deletion of a single word completely upend your property rights and spark a massive legal firestorm? Well, that's what we're here to unpack. We're going to look at how a, quote, semantic erasure and some pretty slick administrative moves made vested, long-held property rights seem to just vanish into thin air.
All right, so to really get what's going on here, we have to start with the land itself. Our story begins on the beautiful shores of Lake Lanier, where for decades, certain properties were built and zoned for a very specific purpose.
So let's turn back the clock. Before the year 2000, these lots were officially zoned as vacation cottages. And this wasn't just a name. The original blueprint showed they were literally engineered for weekend getaways, for transient use. They even had smaller septic systems because, they were never intended for somebody to live there full time. But then, in 2000, the county decided to rebrand them as Lake Residential. And they assured everyone, hey, don't worry, it's just a simple label swap. Nothing is actually changing.
Well, that seemingly harmless label swap actually set the stage for everything that would happen 17 years later. This is where a simple act of deletion, a little bit of administrative housekeeping, created what the source material calls a definitional trap.
You see, for a long, long time, the term lodging services was spelled out right there in the county's development code. It was clear. It provided the legal foundation for things like short-term rentals in those vacation cottages. It wasn't a loophole, it was an established, permitted use.
And then, in 2017, this happened. The county just deleted the definition. Poof, gone. Now, get this. No new law was passed to ban short-term rentals. There was no public vote to outlaw the activity. They just went into the codebook and hit the delete key on the words lodging services. And that single action created a complete legal vacuum.
The source material uses this bakery analogy, and it just perfectly illustrates the tactic. So imagine you own a bakery. It's fully legal, properly zoned. One day, the city just deletes the word bakery from its codebook. Suddenly, they start hitting you with fines, saying you're operating in a legal flour processing facility. Your business gets shut down, even though no law was ever passed to ban bakeries. That's precisely the argument here. By deleting the definition of lodging, the county could then claim that renting your home for less than 30 days suddenly made it an illegal hotel.
So you're probably thinking, wait a minute, what about grandfathered rights? People have been doing this for decades. Well, that definitional trap was just the setup. To get around all those established rights, the county's attorneys started pushing a much bolder, more aggressive argument that these rentals had actually never been legal in the first place.
And to make this case, they dug up this old, kind of vague piece of code that defined a dwelling as a place rented weekly or monthly. And from that, they basically built this whole argument that, well, since it says weekly or monthly, renting for less than a week must have always been illegal, even though everyone knew it had been happening for years and years.
But that entire argument just completely fell apart. The Georgia Court of Appeals, in a case called Hayman, shot the never-legal theory down completely. The court basically said the old code was ambiguous, and when a law is ambiguous, the citizen gets the benefit of the doubt. But here, and this is critical, here's where the timeline gets incredibly murky. According to the case files, the county's legal team allegedly knew about this ruling and sat on it for 22 days. And during that 22-day window, they were actively pushing a different judge to sign a final order against another property owner based on the very precedent that had just been overturned.
And this is a really serious allegation. You see, lawyers have what's called a duty of candor. It's a core ethical rule that honestly keeps our whole legal system from falling apart. It means you absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, knowingly let a judge sign an order based on bad law, especially law that you know has just been overturned. The allegation here is that this fundamental duty was ignored during that critical 22-day window.
Now, the legal maneuvering apparently didn't stop in the courtroom. According to the source material, the strategy seemed to expand into what's being described as punishment by process, basically using the system itself as a weapon to wear property owners down. And the allegations? Well, they paint a pretty grim picture of a coordinated effort. We're talking about unauthorized motions allegedly filed for a boating club, which essentially sabotaged its own defense. But the pressure wasn't just on paper. There are reports of code enforcement officers physically blocking private driveways and even interrogating renters on private property.
The whole thing got so serious that in 2026, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, actually launched a probe into selective enforcement.
Now, what makes this whole case so absolutely striking is what happens when you just look next door. The neighboring county shares the exact same lake, but their approach to this whole issue, well, it couldn't have been more different. I mean, just look at this contrast. On one side, you've got Forsyth County, which chose what the source calls an eradication approach by deleting a definition, leading to endless litigation and a federal probe. On the other side of the lake, you've got Hall County, which took a management approach. They just created a simple licensing system, collected a 12% tax, and used that money to help build their local budget. One county created a legal nightmare, the other just created a new revenue stream.
And this, right here, is the heart of the matter. This story isn't really about whether governments can or should regulate short-term rentals. Of course they can. It's about how they do it. One government chose to manage it like a simple administrative reality, while the other allegedly used the system itself to retroactively erase a right that had existed for decades.
This quote really just says it all. It underscores that your property rights aren't just about the physical dirt in the building. The actual use of your property can be threatened and sometimes taken away just as easily by little administrative action or red pen striking a word out of a dictionary.
Look, you might not own a lake house in Georgia, but this story shows just how fragile our property rights can be when faced with this kind of administrative power, and it really forces us to ask a bigger question. If a right that's been around for generations can be wiped out just by deleting a definition, what other rights do we have that are maybe just one typo, one keystroke away from disappearing?